Well, when we read Paul's description of the church as being the pillar and foundation of the truth of God, it's a phrase that, doesn't really stick out to us because we don't live in the context that Timothy lived in, and that is in the city of Ephesus. And pillars were quite important, quite significant, because the most majestic building in the city of Ephesus was the Temple of Diana. It was a massive building, and it had over 127 pillars that held the roof up, and each one was unique because each one had been crafted and dedicated by a different king. And so every king who put his pillar in the temple wanted to make sure that his pillar was the most noticeable, the most beautiful, the most ornate, if you will. He wanted to stand out from all the rest. And so when he says that the church of the living God is the pillar that should stand out from every other pillar in the religious panoply of the world, then we understand that he's calling us to be focused on his exaltation and not our exaltation. This is an inherent conflict, because as Satan pointed out about Job, that everybody is driven ultimately by self-interest. What's in my best interest? And I think that, Ray Comfort, has a good point when he notes that many times people come to Christ because they believe that by accepting Christ, they're going to experience their best life now. In fact, many times the way we present the Gospels, we tell people, if you give your life to Christ, he'll give you peace, he'll give you joy, he'll give you prosperity, he'll bring you all the things that you're looking for. You'll live a satisfied and fulfilled life. And when a person gives themselves their life to Christ and that kind of invitation, what they find very quickly is they start going through real trials, because Jesus said, if any man comes after me, he's got to deny himself. Well, denying ourselves is not something that we particularly are good at, especially in the materialistic culture that we live in. So I have to deny myself. There's things that I've used to be able to do, and I did with frequency or an allowance, but now God's telling me you can't do that anymore. And I remember that was the first wake-up call for me when I became a Christian, started reading the Bible and realizing that there are a lot of things that I enjoy that suddenly I find out God says are wrong. And so you have to deny yourself and say, Lord, forgive me for that. I confess that as sin, and begin to walk in a new way. And you also find that there are a lot of people who don't like you anymore. After I got saved, almost all of my former friends and associates disappeared. I was so excited as a new believer, just got saved, and I remember going around to all my old buddies and telling about how I found Jesus and how my life has been changed and so forth. And I remember every single one of them just looking at me and not saying a whole lot, but I never heard or saw them again. It was like, in one way, God took me in a different direction, but they were not interested in continuing to have that relationship. In fact, I remember my brother telling me about sharing Christ with a friend of his who had been a lifelong friend, and the guy said, I love you, respect you, but if you ever talk to me about this again, I will never talk to you again my entire life. Well, that became the fulfillment of the promise, and the relationship was broken once and forever. So you just realize that sometimes we tell people that you give your life to Christ, everything's going to be wonderful, and then we wonder why they get disillusioned and they turn away from the Lord. We call it backsliding. I think that's a misnomer, because they aren't sliding back to anything. I don't think they ever left where they were. They were in love with their previous life. They became a Christian to enhance their previous life, and when they found that it would cost them their previous life, then they went back to their previous life or renewed that, and they turned their back on the gospel and on Christ. So, the idea of being an adornment actually means that you kind of stand out. You don't just kind of align with the pack. You begin to take a different pathway for your life, and you stand out from everybody else. And being distinct is only something we like if we can do it in a positive way, where people go, oh, I love that shirt on you. It just really flatters you and brings out the color of your eyes. Well, we feel pretty happy about being that distinct. But if somebody looks at us and said, really, do me a favor and don't ever wear that shirt ever again as long as we live, which is actually a conversation my wife and I have had. And so, I don't always have the best taste. And so the whole point is that we want to be distinct if it's positive and flattering, but there's a distinctiveness that comes when we're a follower of Christ that We don't run with the crowd like we used to run with the crowd. We don't engage in the things that they engage in. That we began to say, that's not for me anymore. I'm not into that. And we don't have to be even rude or obnoxious about it, or even condemning, as some people say. It's just simply saying, that's not part of my life anymore. Well, for these people who whatever they're doing is their life, and for you to say what they're defined by is no longer part of your life, you're going to find that how can two walk together, as the prophet said, unless they be agreed? And so naturally you're taking different paths and you end up going in different directions. So it's a painful thing many times when we become Christians and we begin to lose a lot of those sentimental relationships, people that we hung out with and ran with our entire lives. And yet over the years as they go on, we begin to find, well, the bottom line is we don't have a lot in common. We don't share a lot of things. We don't even value the same things. And our hope is that they'll look at the overall blessing of God upon our life, not blessing in the sense that we don't have challenges, difficulties, and hardships. In fact, I'm convinced that the longer I walk with God, the longer I serve Him, the longer I live on the planet, the more difficult and challenging it becomes to be a follower of Jesus Christ. And not saying that in the sense that I'm tempted not to, but I'm just saying, God, I just would really like to see it easier, not harder. I was telling my wife the other day, when we were younger, we thought that when we reached this point in our life, it would be basically sliding down the slide. We'd be, gliding with grace, and everything would be copacetic. And yet we find that we deal with more heartbreak and disappointment and just real deep angst and pain for people that we love than we ever had before. Part of that is the reality of eternal condemnation is not something that's an abstraction as much as it once was. It was always knew that the Bible taught that there was a place called hell. But as I get older, I begin to contemplate the fact that it's really a place where people are going to go who don't know Jesus. And everything I read, as I reinforce my understanding by looking at what Jesus had to say about it, really makes it very terrifying and painfully terrifying to think that people that you love and care for could end up there because they don't know Christ. And so I find myself praying a lot more earnestly and, weeping more easily and really struggling inside more earnestly, because I don't want these people to miss out on eternity. Frankly, I have relatives, in our greater family that, I don't really click with. We're not on the same base. We don't really share much in common. And yet I still don't want to see them miss eternity. And so it has a powerful change when you realize that as you begin to focus on growing in Christ, you become a pillar in God's temple, and that pillar stands out from the other pillars. You have your own unique gifts, your own unique calling, your own pathway that God has called you to walk down. And the important thing I think we need to keep in mind is that sometimes He's going to really cause us to adorn ourselves in a way that is completely different and can even put us at odds with other people, sometimes even other believers. And that's because I think that many times as Christians, we get headed down unproductive pathways. And when you call that out, that's not always popular. That's not always something that's applauded. So I guess that's a key thing of understanding. The other thing that he says is not only are we the pillar of the truth, we are the foundation of that truth. That really, it's not about the externals, but it's about really the truth, or I would say the trueness of your life in regards to the truth of God. How truly are you striving to live within the boundaries of the truth? Because that's really what the biblical truth is. It's you might call it the foundation is a fence work. A building can never be anything more than its foundation. The foundation defines not only its height and width and its length, but it really defines how much weight it can carry and how tall a building it can be. And so when we talk about the Bible and God being the foundation of the truth, or the church being the foundation of the truth, we have to understand that we are called to live within those parameters and to be faithful to God and to really be always examining ourselves to see whether or not we're in the faith. And I don't think Paul means, am I a Christian anymore, like he'd lost his salvation, but am I living within the parameters of what faith requires and the truth that governs over what that faith is? Well, out of time. We'll continue tomorrow. God bless you.